So when I asked you guys on Twitter what my video should be for this week, Darkseid War Act 2 was the clear winner by leaps and bounds. And so as we get into the beginning of Act 2, what we do is pick up with the events immediately following the conclusion of Act 1. Something I want to pay special attention to is that the one-shots following the completion of Act 1 and the beginning of Act 2 aren't really a necessity. For those of you who were following my videos on the first part of the story, you will notice that I stopped at the Batman one-shot. The reason for this is due to the fact that the one-shots of Flash, Superman, Green Lantern, Shazam, and Lex Luthor were best covered after the release of the first story of Act 2. With that in mind, where this video will undoubtedly leave some questions, what it will also do is set the stage for the varying one-shots by sending different characters off in their own situations, which will be covered under their individual stories. Having said that, as we get into this, we join the combined forces of Jessica Cruz, Wonder Woman, Mr. Miracle, Cyborg, Shazam, and the Flash, following the death of Darkseid at the hands of the Anti-Monitor. As a bit of a refresher, at the conclusion of Act 1, as the Anti-Monitor was previously a being named Mobius who looked to explore the antimatter universe, upon discovering its origin, Mobius unwittingly released the anti-life equation, an aspect of the DC universe, allowing its wielder to dominate the will of others. Because the anti-life equation had transformed Mobius into the Anti-Monitor, Mobius was imbued with its power and during his battle with Darkseid, forced Barry Allen to merge with the Black Racer, one of Death's aspects who killed Darkseid while being controlled by Mobius. While Superman and Lex Luthor battle the various forces of Darkseid during their time trapped in Apokolips, because the planet did not have a yellow sun, Clark found himself becoming consistently weaker, during which time Lex threw him into one of Apokolips's solar pits, with Superman emerging having been corrupted by its energies and possessing a modest improvement to his powers, while simultaneously losing his desire to hold back. Now picking up with the current moment, because Clark has taken on a much darker persona, rather than escaping Apokolips alongside Lex, instead, he chooses to leave him to his fate on the planet. Now this moment is essentially Jeff Johns giving us an explanation of what all has happened to Clark. Where the final issue of Darkseid War Act 1 ended with Superman stating that he was tired of fighting on behalf of people who didn't deserve it, and had intended to make the decision for himself as to who was entitled to live or die, in this instance, the true change of Superman hits home in the idea that his previous role of acting as a hero and role model has now been cast aside to be replaced by his corrupted form, who for all intents and purposes has been driven mad by the pits of Apokolips. Now transitioning to Batman alongside Hal Jordan, this portion of the story establishes how things have changed following the death of Darkseid and its ramifications. What we're told is that because Anti-Monitor had killed Darkseid, a byproduct of this act is that Mobius is now undergoing the process of ridding himself of the anti-life equation. Now in truth, where we'll get a better understanding of what Batman is referring to later in this video, the conversation between Hal Jordan and Batman also leads into Bruce's one-shot comic by revealing that with Darkseid dead and Anti-Monitor temporarily out of the picture, the ability for Bruce to know all things that have and are happening by way of the Mobius chair will allow him to function as the Batman that Gotham deserves. What Bruce also reveals to us is that because Darkseid kept his ilk in order using a combination of fear and power, without Darkseid to control Apokolips or its forces, the parademons are essentially roaming throughout the universe. Now again, like Batman and Superman, the situation of the parademons presents an issue that requires a coming together of the Green Lantern Corps and sets the stage for Hal Jordan's one-shot comic, which will cover his actions in dealing with the parademons, as well as the Green Lantern Corps and the Guardians of the Universe themselves. And so picking up with Lex Luthor, what I want to do here is sidetrack for a second and talk about the nature of the planet Apokolips. In DC Comics, Apokolips is usually depicted in a limited capacity with only glimpses provided in differing stories. As a result, these glimpses have given way to the idea that the planet is effectively destitute, barren, and only inhabited by differing races from across the multiverse who are in the process of being converted into parademons. In truth, Apokolips is actually inhabited by a wide array of different groups with its society functioning in a hierarchical fashion. The majority of the populace and its lowest class are referred to as lowlies, who are considered to be the scum of the planet with no sense of self-worth or value. Following the lowlies are parademons, who serve as the police of Apokolips and are usually engineered from lowlies themselves or from conquered foes. Above the parademons are the female Furies. Something to note is that the name Female Furies is actually a misnomer since there are male members of the group, but the Furies essentially operate as Darkseid's personal guard and are led by Granny Goodness, a former lowly who worked her way through the ranks of Darkseid's forces and to her current position, as well as Kanto, a human who had killed Darkseid's former top assassin and took his place. Now, the individuals seen here encountering Lex are actually a new creation by Geoff Johns called the Forgotten People, who are led by a woman named Ardora. Now, what's actually interesting about this is that those who have an affinity for older comics will actually recognize Ardora as a character from the Silver Age, who debuted in Superman number 167 and hailed from a world called Lexer, where its citizens revered Lex Luthor as a hero. While she was killed in 1983 as part of the lead-up to Crisis on Infinite Earths, John's inclusion of her character into this story is designed to reflect her original appearance, and that according to the blind prophets of her people, when Darkseid dies, a human would walk the ashes and change everything. Now, where this plot thread will find its continuation in the Lex Luthor one-shot, what this story does is shift its focus back to Earth with Jessica Cruz, Flash, Shazam, Cyborg, and Wonder Woman. Regarding this particular bit, the speech of Barry Allen actually provides some valuable insight into his character and how he views life after merging with the Black Racer. What he tells us is that because the concept of death exists, by extension, the value of life is enhanced, and that the heroes of Earth function to ensure the protection of that very life. As a result, if death didn't exist, the paths that have led them to who they are may have been vastly different, giving way to an infinite number of possibilities on who they might have become. However, before the Flash can finish, he vanishes from the area, during which time we shift our focus to Billy Batson. Where Johns doesn't give us a lot to go on here, during this instance, Billy's met with a barrage of voices which seem to emanate from the pantheon of gods who provide him with his powers. Where this will also play out in the Shazam one-shot and see a new host of gods replacing those of Solomon, Hercules, Atlas, Zeus, Achilles, and Mercury. When he disappears from the landscape with Wonder Woman proposing that the group split in half searching for Shazam and Flash, their attempt is thwarted by the arrival of Kalibak, the son of Darkseid, who had lost his eyes while battling Grail. At this point, we travel back to Lex Luthor, who's still being held captive by the Forgotten People, during which time we learn that their intention is to capture the Omega effect of Darkseid, harness it, and channel it into Lex. To focus on this for a second, the Omega effect is somewhat enigmatic in that it's both a plot device to explain Darkseid's power, but is also a physical source of energy. On the whole, the general consensus among readers, as far as I've been able to tell, is that the Omega effect is the opposite of the Source, which exists as the source of all things within the DC multiverse. Where this is a little ambiguous, because the Omega effect serves as a source of Darkseid's power, following his death, the Omega effect began traveling back to Apokolips. To this end, where the intention of the Forgotten People is to harness that power through Lex Luthor, once this happens, the story shifts its focus to following up with Grail, while simultaneously establishing what Luthor has become. What we're told is that after the death of Darkseid, Mobius had cocooned himself into a kind of energy sphere and begun the process of returning to a more humanoid form. Now, how much he will change is something we won't actually discover in this video. Instead, what Johns is doing here is setting the stage for what comes next, with Mobius essentially continuing on with vast abilities and the concept of the Anti-Monitor existing as a plot device for reboots being thrown out the window. In addition to this, we also learn that Lex Luthor has successfully harnessed the power of the Omega effect, transforming him into the god of Apokolips and taking Darkseid's place. From here, we're going to be a little bit dangerous, and we're actually going to jump over the one-shots and straight to the second part of Act 2. Now, if you're interested in seeing the one-shots, feel free to post a comment below and let me know, but like most any trilogy or ongoing series, this portion of the story continues the idea of information while including a little bit of action. Opening up with a monologue from Wonder Woman, what this does is provide a story that's designed to juxtapose the new gods of Batman, Superman, Flash, Shazam, Green Lantern, and Lex with the story of Ino and Dionysus. Where the story as is told by Wonder Woman is a little limited, in Greek mythology, there existed a woman named Semele, the daughter of Boeotian hero Cadmus, and his wife Harmonia, and sister of Ino. In the Greek stories, Semele had been visited and was impregnated by Zeus, an affair that was discovered when Hera visited Semele under the guise of an old woman. Planting seeds of doubt in the mind of Semele, Hera drove Semele to call upon Zeus directly to prove his godhood and establish that he was the father. However, because death always befell those who looked upon a Greek god who was undisguised, Semele died on the spot, with Zeus taking the unborn child unto his own. Now, where the story begins to splinter off into differing variations is when Zeus allows the unborn child to gestate within his own leg, after which things play out in a multitude of different ways. Within this story, Geoff Johns has gone with the most popular theme of Dionysus being handed over to Ino to be raised away from Hera's wrath. However, once Hera learned that the child still lived, she drove Ino to madness, who jumped off a cliff with Dionysus in her arms, but was saved at the last minute by Zeus, who granted them immortality as gods of the sea so that they could never be touched by Hera. Now, the reason for John's including this tale in the opening of this issue is that during Homer's epic poem Odyssey, Odysseus had escaped the wrath of Poseidon. Where Odysseus would have died to the torrent of the sea and its violence, he was saved after being provided a veil by Ino, which carried him to shore, saving his life and allowing the rest of the story to continue. What Johns is essentially doing here is using the idea of one calamity to establish that from the destruction wrought by its existence, there can be new life and rebirth, but not without trials and tribulations of its own, meaning that the new gods of Batman, Superman, and so on have to come to grips with their new powers, cast off their corrupted natures, and return to their role as heroes. To this end, with Calabac and his forces arriving to seek their revenge for the death of Darkseid, we pick up with Jessica Cruz, who continues her inner struggle with Volthoom while simultaneously fighting Calabac. Now, if you're interested in learning more about Jessica, I have a discussion on her character in my previous videos on Darkseid War, but while she focuses her efforts on Calabac and Lashina, we also shift our focus to Mr. Miracle. However, because Scott Free is an escape artist with no physical powers, his battle against Kanto is more akin to dodging attacks rather than being offensive. In addition to this, as we discussed in my previous videos on Darkseid War, the conflict between Kanto and Scott Free is long-lived in that Scott had routinely escaped Kanto's attempts to return him to Apocalypse under the service of Darkseid. As a result, the battle between the two is less about revenge over Darkseid's death and more about Kanto attempting to finally kill the quarry who has escaped him so often. However, in the midst of their fight, Big Barda makes her presence known on the battlefield. Now in truth, Barda is a character that we haven't really talked about before, and to be honest, she's a character I'm not wildly familiar with. I did talk to some of you all on Periscope, and the general consensus was that Barda had appeared as part of the lead-up to Darkseid War during Earth 2 World's End, but disappeared after that and didn't reappear until this story. However, the main focus on her in the context of the events as they're unfolding now is that because she had turned against Darkseid, she was considered an eternal enemy of the Furies and Kanto, who looked to kill her for her treachery. To this end, because she still harbors a love for Scott Free, she uses her sword to kill Kanto, after which she turns her attention to Calabac, Steppenwolf, and the rest of their forces. Something that's also interesting here is that like the Parademons, despite the fact that Darkseid is dead, they continue to swear their allegiance to him even if only in memory. Now to be honest, I would go as far as to say that the allegiance held is more out of fear that if Darkseid returned and found his forces had deserted him, he would likely hunt them down and kill them all. But regardless of their motivations, the fact remains that to Scott, should Granny Goodness discover that he and Barda are still in league with one another, Granny is almost certain to find them and kill them. On the other hand, for Barda, the death of Darkseid signals an opportunity for them to essentially start their lives over free from his control. Indeed, this particular point is made by Barda when she speaks directly to Lashina, presenting a ceasefire stating that if the Furies stay away, then Barda and Scott Free will stay away. However, because the hatred of Lashina and the Furies transcends their loyalty to Darkseid and is rooted in their feeling of being betrayed, the offer is declined, with Lashina claiming that they will continue to hunt down Barda and Scott Free until their deaths. From here, we jump back to Marina and Grail as the two stand before the cocoon of Mobius. What we're told is that while he undergoes his metamorphosis into what he was prior to being possessed by the anti-life equation, because he is in such a vulnerable state, he has employed shadow demons to protect him by warding off or killing anyone who strays too close. Now to focus on this for a second, we've never really delved into the idea of the shadow demons in the realm of DC Comics, but these are essentially the Weaponers of Qord who function as the mortal enemies of the Guardians of the Universe and live within the Antimatter universe, but because the Anti-Monitor was all-powerful during his time there, the Weaponers were transformed into the shadow demons, sometimes willingly and sometimes unwillingly, but existed as soldiers for Mobius. In addition to this, as we transition back to Wonder Woman and her forces, we also learn that because they still don't know why Anti-Monitor arrived on Earth in the first place, their initial goal should be to seek out the Crime Syndicate of America, who battled Anti-Monitor and were forced to abandon their Earth 3 universe in the conflict. However, the problem faced by the League is that Argus, the Amanda Waller-led government agency holding the remnants of the Crime Syndicate, have classified them as Level 0 inmates. Now for those of you who had seen the first season of Heroes or are coming from Marvel Comics, a Level 0 classification is essentially a Level 5 classification from Heroes and the Raft in Marvel Comics. As a result, where Wonder Woman and the others discuss their inability to communicate with Hal Jordan or Batman, with Scott Free able to enter or exit any building due to both his ability to pick locks as well as his Mother Box teleporter, his services are offered to the League as a means to enter Belle Reef Prison, question the Crime Syndicate, and escape without getting caught. From here, the story shifts its focus to a conversation between Steve Trevor and Wonder Woman. Now, to be honest, this isn't really essential to the overall Darkseid arc, but it does give us some insight into how Steve views the end of their relationship and Wonder Woman's seemingly pursuit of Superman. What Diana tells us is that of all the conflicts the League has been in since its formation in the New 52, they have yet to encounter a situation quite like this, in that the League itself is fractured, with most of its number possessing heightened godlike powers. Furthermore, Diana considers the current predicament with the Anti-Monitor to be an Amazonian affair, and that Grail is the product of Darkseid and Marina Black, who is an Amazonian, and had brought this entire situation down on their heads in an effort to force a conflict between Anti-Monitor and Darkseid. To this end, Diana sees this as a situation that needs to be handled in-house. However, for Steve, his feelings come in the form that, like the early days of Superman when he wouldn't date Lois Lane due to the dangerous life that comes with having powers, Steve believes that the relationship between himself and Wonder Woman ended due to her desire to find someone who could keep up with her dangerous life. Where Wonder Woman doesn't really deny this, the implication from what Johns is telling us is that she's torn between her affections for Steve and that he had helped her understand how to function among normal society, and Superman, who's able to keep up with her physically. However, before the two of them were able to continue their conversation any further, Superman returns, seizing Trevor from behind. At this point, Johns gives us a kind of monologue from Grail while establishing a series of events in sequence, and that with the Mobius chair, Batman remains obsessed with finding out who the Joker is. Mobius continues his metamorphosis within his cocoon. Wonder Woman engages Superman in battle to protect Steve, and the rest of the League, alongside Scott and Barda, arrive in Belle Reve Prison. And so as Darkseid War Act 2 comes to a close, with Hal Jordan returning to Gotham following the events of the one-shot comic, we learn that the entire reason for why Grail had allied herself with the Anti-Monitor in the first place was that she had either known or suspected that with the anti-life equation, Mobius was guaranteed to be the victor, meaning that once he began his metamorphosis, the anti-life equation would be cast off, allowing for Grail to take possession of it, making her the goddess of anti-life. With that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you guys have any questions, feel free to post them down in the comments section. I'll answer them if I can, or if some of you guys happen to see the questions and you can answer them better than I can, feel free to post up a response. And I will catch you guys later. Peace.